and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. This week, our friend and associate Carl Teichrib joins us to tell us about his date with Burning Man. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. Our senior researcher, Ron Hensel, is unfortunately not with us to introduce the sponsors of today's webcast, but never fear, we have sponsors nonetheless. And with that, here is Carl.
Hey, Don. Good to
How
be
are
on the
you?
show. I'm doing
Yeah,
good. Yourself?
like always, I'm fat and good looking. Un-
Perfect.
un-
Perfect.
Undeterred by assaults by those from those who don't really like me. I don't really care. You know, a while back, and I know you'll appreciate this. You may have heard me say this before, but she was, troubled by some who were attacking her for being a former angel channeler, now Christian, and they believe she was doing this for fun and profit mostly. And so someone had called me and said, "Can you talk to her and give her some advice because she's busy trying to fend them off by responding?" And I called her and we talked, and I said, "Okay, here's something you need to learn and memorize. I think memorize is good because you will use it often, and that is this: just because someone invites you to a gunfight doesn't mean you have to show up." The more you try to argue, the deeper you get yourself in. If it's something serious that's going to help those who are watching, we call the lurkers, they're watching, they're just trying to sort it out, then write an article or a comment about that. Don't write in defense of yourself. You will forever be trying to do that. So uh, that's kind of my philosophy on that.
That's all right. I understand that. It's, when you enter this space of engaging with issues of truth and cultural claims, because we have culture both outside the church and within the Christian community, you end up, of course, having points of friction sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that would be kind of an understatement. Yeah. And and
No, I
some
get that.
and sometimes they'll say something like, "You're mean" or "You're narrow-minded," and so I go, "Yeah, you could be right on both counts, actually." Right. And there's other worse things you probably could know about me. I'll give you my kids' phone numbers; they will tell you. But the real question is, am I wrong? Let's go back to what we're talking about. Name call all you want. I don't really care. So, uh, and you are well acquainted with that. You and I met at the Parliament of the World's Religions a few years back.
Yes, back in 2015 at the Salt Lake City Parliament.
Ah, yeah, right.
Yes, yes.
and and we were in the room of, as I recall, you and I were in one of the workshops by the Fellowship of ISIS. Uh,
That's right. Yes, yes. And
and yeah.
I was just going to say, and I was, it was an interesting situation. I came in, had mutual friends with Tri Grace Ministries out of Ephraim who had connected me to stay at a home in Salt Lake City. And I remember sitting there. You were there. Bill Hansberger was there. Others from the team were there from Haven, and different people engaged in missions who were coming to the Parliament were all in this house, and I was a complete stranger. And I remember walking in going, well, this is really awkward, but hey, I'm used to awkward situations, so whatever. And I'm sitting there kind of just taking it all in, listening to the conversation around me. And then in walks this lady, and we make eye contact, and it's Rita. And she's like, what are you doing here? Because I had met Rita, I believe it was the year before, at a Christian conference. And she was the one who broke the ice. And it was through that event that you and I connected, attended a number of the workshops together at the Parliament. Went back and forth and compared a lot of notes, and we realized that, oh golly, we're going to some of the exact same workshops, the ones on paganism, the ones on Wicca, the ones that are bridging this new pagan reality into the culture. So
Yeah.
that's where we made our first point of contact.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. My first actual uh, knowing contact with Wiccans was in 1993 at the Parliament of World Religions,
Hmm.
where I met Lady Olivia, and I was fascinated because they were not at all what had been represented by those who were informed by Mike Warnke's terrible book. And so, yeah, we're kind of navigating through and saying, okay, what exactly do they believe? What exactly is their worldview? How do we interact with that?
Right.
And so we spent time with the Fellowship of Isis, with the Covenant of the Goddess, and that was interesting. So now you are, just so everyone knows, a researcher and missionaries to non-Christian religions.
Yes, yeah, I would say that's accurate. Definitely, I mean, that's what I've been known for, especially on the research side. And I've been doing this full time since 1997. And so much of that has been helping other authors, other researchers kind of get the context, understand not just simply what is happening in the news, because I'm actually not watching the news near as much as people think I'm watching. I typically actually try to go and understand what the larger movements behind the news that simply doesn't get reported, what's going on there. So that includes things like the Parliament of World Religions, interfaithism, which is a form of spiritual politics. That's one example,
It
uh,
is.
and it's a powerful one because it drags the church into it. And in fact, we could make the argument that if it wasn't for the 1893 Parliament of World Religions, we likely wouldn't have the Western form of global internationalism. The concept of the League of Nations, even the United Nations, comes out of the milieu that was birthed at the 1893 Parliament, especially the League of Nations and the rise of the social gospel movement. All of this coalesces, it comes together around that event, and then gives the kind of the impetus or the energy for later on being the sense of internationalism that we have now, global governance, which is really interesting. So already at the interfaith level, um, it has remarkably important roots. And so that's just one component. But I mean, there's, as you and I know, we've had these conversations. I dive into the geopolitics of it. Um, Transhumanism. I was one of the early Christian researchers on that subject, and a whole bunch of other kind of crazy stuff that I've jumped into. And so over the years, what's interesting is it's shifted a little bit, and it's not just simply the research side to warn the church, but now you find that you're engaging more and more as you're kind of rubbing shoulders with these people, and inevitably you become a type of missionary, and that's
Well,
not what you expected, sometimes.
yeah, and yeah, and I appreciate that you pointed back to 1893 as a pivot point for many things that we're seeing happening now, because, like you, I am intrigued by history.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Too often, as we approach issues of the day, we tend to think that they are new issues that just popped up like 24 hours ago. Uh, many people have this idea that history started, I don't know, 15 years ago, when
Not even close.
actually most of this stuff goes back and back and back and back. In fact, our blog this week, we're starting with the Gospel of John, because we're going to wander for a minute, but I think it becomes helpful. Uh, the Gospel of John, because the Gospel of John, although it is about the history of who Jesus was, it's called the Gospel of Belief because belief or believe occurs about 98 times in the Gospel. But he's doing something more than just saying you should believe. He's saying this is the Jesus who you should believe in. And he starts it with the very first three verses. He's actually writing an apologetic pointing out that two groups are false teachers: the Abionites, who denied the pre existence of Christ, and the Docetists who denied the physicality of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you see that his thesis in the first 18 verses, he points back to Genesis. In the beginning, Genesis was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were created by him. So now he's just shot right across the bow of the Ebionites. And then you go down to verse 14, and the Word became flesh. Now he's shooting across the bow of the Docetists. And almost everything that follows, even a selection of what issues to use from Jesus' life, support this premise that he did in the first 14 verses. It's really an amazing thing.
That's cool.
We, we miss that.
Yeah.
And yet
Yeah.
we have the same issues today. Who are we talking about? Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, right down the whole thing. And in this case, New Agers. So that brings us to the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is your book, which is at least how do I want to put this? It's not an up-to-date description, but a helpful description of where we are at today. Here we go, screen share. I get lost sometimes, but I have to navigate on my own without Ron to hold my hand. Game of Gods. What is the temple of man in the age of re-enchantment? What do you mean by the title?
Well, the interesting story. I was wrestling with the title of the book. I think every author wrestles to some extent with titles. And my son asked the question, Dad, what is this about? And as I broke it down, he's like, it's like man thinks that we're God, which comes out of the Genesis chapter 3 narrative of man's fall, which is true. Man thinks that we're God, but all we can do is play games of God against each other. We're not creating anything new. We're not actually God in that sense at all, but all we can do is play these games against each other. Like, you're right. That's a cool way of saying it. It's a cool way of looking at it. So Game of Gods tackles that. It tackles it from the perspective of, first of all, there's a lot of history, and it's well documented. I have 1,800 footnotes. And so it tackles it from the perspective of global governance, the geopolitical side of it, specifically through some of my encounters when I've attended world government meetings, United Nations forums, that type of thing. Because I go, that's what I do. I go to these events when I can, when the time and the resources enable me to do so. And then on the religious interfaith side, the Parliament of World Religions, and I was already going to interfaith events back. I think my first one was 1999, when I attended a working group meeting between the United Religions Initiative, and the World Federalist Association, which was the largest pro-world government lobby group in the U.S. at the time. Now they're called, I think, Citizens for Global Solutions. So there's the kind of a carryover between the geopolitics and interfaithism. That's something that I really work with quite a bit. And then transhumanism fits in, and on all of this, it's looking to see, okay, what's the changeover from the Western Christian moral ethical compass that we had, that our parents, grandparents, and our predecessors held? How did all of this shift and change to the point we're at today? Which is where the term re-enchantment comes in. It's not my term. It's a term that's floating around. It's fairly loosely floating around. But basically, it recognizes that modernity birthed postmodernism really in the 1960s. But postmodernism itself didn't give us any real answers. All it did was give us a vacuum of meaning. And so postmodernism had, by its very nature, its own solution birthed into itself.
Right.
And that is that our sense of wonder, mystery, purpose now has to be grounded in something that is in the material, both the spiritual and the material. So it goes back to this pagan cosmology, this pagan sense that we're all connected, we're all one. And we could look at this and go, well, that's the New Age movement. But the New Age movement, the difference between that and re-enchantment is the New Age movement tends to focus on the self. Really, it's a form of spirituality dovetailing with the human potential movement of the 1960s, what came out of Esalen.
Right.
This is slightly different. It's not about the singular. It's about the we. It's about the collective. It's about the
Right.
grander human experience. And then how that becomes the narrative that shapes policies, it shapes ethics, it shapes even gender. All of a sudden we realize that, oh, it's all blending, everything moves together, it's all one. We're all part of this oneness. There's
Oneness.
really no
Yeah.
there's no distinction between God, man, and nature. So in a way, it's the mystical side of Babel 2.0.
It is. It totally is. And we've talked about that. In fact, we have kicked back and forth the possibility of maybe doing a book along those lines because this is really important. We have watched, you and I and others, many without realizing it, the repaganization of culture.
Right.
And what's intriguing to me is the atheists who fought so hard against Christianity are suddenly looking at what is left when Christianity's out of the picture and they're going, I'm scared.
Yep. And they should be. And they should be.
And they should be. So
Yes.
they are now uh, Christian atheists or atheist Christians, some of them attending church, cultural Christians, they'll call themselves, Dawkins does. So that's all kind of interesting. Now, before we get to our topic here, so that's what the book is about. I recommend it. Um, uh, before we get into Burning Man, which is a um, trans transitional festival, that's not what it is.
Transformational.
Transformational. Thank you. I'm having word burps lately. A transformational festival. So talk about transformation that feeds into exactly what we're talking about. However, we have a question from Krista, our good friend Krista, which is, can you speak to the interesting news about the UK arresting foreigners, U.S. citizens, for what they deal as information in social media platforms such as Elon X, Musk's X. In other words, they're arresting people for information they're relaying on X as being fake information.
I can't speak into it any more than you probably already know, Krista. I mean, I've seen some of the posts as well. I've seen some of the feeds talking about the dangers. And in fact, I believe it was the London police chief. I may be miscorrect on this. Maybe that's misinformation. But I saw a police officer from England talking about, yeah, we can arrest you. We will arrest you for misinformation. Misinformation and disinformation is the battleground for really whose narrative is going to come on top. And there's a really it's really interesting how the World Economic Forum this last January considered both those topics, misinformation and disinformation, to be the greatest threat to global democracy.
Right.
Meanwhile, they're pushing their own narrative. And it's basically, if you disagree with a narrative, if you're critical of their narrative, then you are engaging in misinformation. Never mind the underlying assumption, asking that question, is your narrative even true?
Right. Right. And that is not to be tolerated.
That's right. No, we don't do that. We cannot tolerate you undermining the assumptions that we have built our narrative on. And so I don't have any real inside information, no more than probably yourself. Nevertheless, I do find it disturbing. I'm from Canada, and so we've already been playing around with these things as a culture and as a government. I watched how my government canceled people, including people I knew,
right,
during the convoy, and
right,
that was significant. I mean, that was an eye opener. That was a shocker for a lot of people. And then looking at scouring Facebook and Twitter feeds for those people who were engaged in the convoy or in some other act of support, and I was one of those who supported it. I still support what happened, absolutely, and I had friends who were directly involved. And all of a sudden, even for myself, you were like, "All right, is the hammer going to fall?" And it didn't, thank goodness. But at least not for me personally. I watched it as it fell on others, and I'm like, boy, we're living in a pretty crazy time when just a Facebook post might all of a sudden get you into some serious hot water.
So it's like, what, shut down your bank accounts. Now you have no access to your funds and so forth and so on. So do not, under any circumstances, question our narrative or we will punish you.
Yeah, or do it
Uh,
very, do it carefully. If you take a look at my Facebook feed, um, it's my personal feed. So I've got everything under the sun, from stuff happening with the families to sunsets to last night's
right,
awesome Northern Lights, to what took place at Burning Man, to sometimes here's an article on freedom. But
right,
I have to be a little careful of how I even word it,
right.
because I do know the algorithm is looking, and all of a sudden I may all of a sudden have things shut down. But that's the
Well,
reality. That's the reality of our digital world.
it is, it is. But you and I both know, we've been at this, more than 3 weeks, that we can say what we need to say in terms that are more difficult for censors to say, you can't say that.
Correct.
Uh, but you have to work at crafting that language. You can
Right.
still say it, and it can still be true and just as hard hitting,
Yep.
but you don't have to poke them in the eye. Yeah, it could kind of just float it out there.
Right. And okay, and to this point in the Christian community, we expect that gentlemen like yourself, Don, myself, that we come in with rhetoric,
Right,
hard rhetoric. Sometimes there's a place for that. A
right.
lot of times there isn't. A lot of times it can be said in a way that is more contextually accurate without having to resort to words or language that's always going to flag you immediately as soon as I post it, and all of a sudden demonstrate that, okay, if I can't get past the language barrier that our own culture has sometimes put in place.
Yeah, sometimes the question, asking the question, is a better way
Yes.
because, right. And
Yep.
in fact, it's interesting. When Greg Kukel did his book Tactics, I thought he had to have been following me around. This is how I've done this for over 30 years. Well, as it happens, that's his personality too. That's how he does it.
Yep.
And questions are so much more powerful. Um, so, having said that, I think that addresses the next question that Krista had, which is this a real life example of what the WEF and Parliament of World's Religions are working toward? And I would say, yeah, there is a growing trend among those who do not like a Judeo Christian worldview, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and they will work hard to shut down anything that competes with their narrative.
Right.
So,
Yes. And they have to, because this is a battle place. It should be a marketplace of ideas, but it has become a battle place of ideas.
yeah. So, how does that then play out in Burning Man? Because it does play out in Burning Man, and those who know who attend it may not realize it, but it is a transformational festival. How did it? We're not going to go through the whole history, but why is it a transformational festival, and why is it important that evangelical Christians are attending it?
Sure. Well, first of all, for the space of 1 week, the world's eyes, the world's attention is on Burning Man. If we have 5 drops of rain during the event, all of a sudden it's in the media, it's in the news. If somebody dies at Burning Man, and that happened again this year, and it happens every year. It's a city of, well, this year we had a little bit smaller population. I think we had 67,000 people. You take any given city of 67,000 people over the course of a week, somebody will die.
Right.
That's just that's how the numbers stack up. Well, at Burning Man, you have somebody who dies, and that happened the very first day of the event, and it was already in the news. I was getting stuff sent to me. Oh, somebody died. So that tells you how the world's attention is focused on this particular gathering, which has been described as a festival, but it's really not a festival. It's more. There's more going on. It's a community. It has its own ethos. It has a global reach. It's more than just simply a gathering or a festival. There is something more remarkable taking place, and a big part of that is what happens at Burning Man, especially the conversations. They are world level, world changing conversations, and then it spreads those ideas beyond the event itself into the cracks and pores of Western
So what
civilization.
happens at Burning Man doesn't stay at Burning Man.
Not even close. Even though you'll have, I've seen the signs. We've all seen the signs about Las Vegas. What happens in Las Vegas, or what happens in Sin City, stays in Sin City. That's not actually true. The consequences do
Go.
ripple past.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, 100%. So what is interesting about Burning Man is it's been around since 1986. From 86 to 1990, all it was a gathering on the beach, just on the Baker Beach in California, in San Francisco. It wasn't meant to be anything really more than a gathering, especially in the first few years, of just some friends having some beer, lighting a man on fire, going, yay. And then it caught the attention of a group called the Cacophony Society. And this is their little history. And the Cacophony Society said, hey, this is pretty cool. And they let their network know. And all of a sudden you had this underground guerrilla art movement showing up. And that's because that's what the Cacophony Society was known as. And now you have like 800-900 people who show up at the beach. But there's a problem. Now the cops take notice, and the cops show up. And in the world of bureaucracy, it wasn't that what they were doing was wrong. It was the fact that they didn't have a permit. So the cops said, you can't burn it. You don't have a permit. And so Cacophony said, hey, we know a spot out in the Nevada desert where it's on federal land. We have to get a permit for it, but there won't be any issue at all. It's because there's nobody around. There's just literally nobody around. And we can go out there and we can do this crazy thing. It was called Zone Trip 4. And so in 1990, I believe there was quite a few hundred. I don't think it was much more than, well, I have to go back in my notes and see. I don't think it was anything more than like maybe 1,500 or 1,200 people, but they all came out. I think it was even less than that. They came out, but by 95, 96, 97, you had 10,000 people showing up. It was the Wild West. There wasn't really any rules. It was mayhem. It was chaos. It was really nasty. By 1997, there was enough things that transpired. There was deaths. There was some pretty nasty things that took place. And so all of a sudden they went, no, in order for us to keep doing this, we actually have some rules. We need to have some boundaries.
You have to kind of civilize the temporary town now.
Absolutely, yes. And then by the year 2000, a temple is built, and it was a temple to commemorate the death of a friend who was on his way to Burning Man. And since 2000, the temple really has become the epicenter for the event. While the man is the symbol that everybody gathers around, and the city that's constructed is all focused on the man, and it's a large man effigy. The real heartbeat, the real place where people's lives are touched in a hard way, serious way too, is at the temple, because the temple is a place where people go to unload themselves. So all week long, the temple becomes a place of mourning and sadness. It is like a funeral for 24 hours, 7 to 8 days long. And at the end of the week, the man is burned, and it's a colossal party. And then the following day, the Sunday night, then the temple is burned, and it's quite the opposite. It's silent, it's quiet. You'll hear crying, you'll see tears, that type of thing.
So it is.
But what makes it transformational, Don, I'll just quickly, sorry. What makes it transformational is it's a full onslaught of all of your senses, all of the time. And you're constantly being bombarded with these experiences, these overwhelming encounters, converging worldviews, and this sense that we are transgressing all the norms. And in so doing, we're writing a whole new set of norms for ourselves and then for those outside.
So it is a deeply spiritual event. And all of these sensory things are coming at you, and spiritual things are coming at you. And people are pretty open to a lot of spiritual ideas as a result of that. Now,
Right.
if you had talked to some of them, many of them, maybe they would believe in some sort of a Jesus. But I find, and our sponsor speaks to this week, that many of them have a designer Jesus that isn't the Jesus
You
of
know what?
Scripture.
Do you cringe when Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest Jesus fashion forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways in the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You won't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, and Mormon Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements when you attend. The cost of admission is only your eternal soul. Required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City. You really don't want to miss it.
And there you go. Does that kind of speak to the issue that we're talking about here?
Oh, very much, very much. In fact, you will have different Jesuses there. That's for sure. We had some of those conversations. One of the people from our camp, his name was Caden. He was at another Christian camp. It's a progressive Christian camp that's very affirming, very affirming. Oh, yes, yes, yes. You had an LSD trip or a psychedelic trip and discovered that you're divine or whatever. We affirm that. And you had a dream that you're going to be a Buddhist. Yes, we affirm that. And it's a very affirming progressive camp. And so they have their own little prayer book. This is from a few years ago already, and we have liturgies, so on. So they have a Jesus. They're promoting a Jesus, and Caden ended up running into a young lady there. My daughter, Austin, and Caden went to their workshop on psychedelics and Jesus, and so Caden had this conversation with this young lady who was there looking to try to have an understanding of who Jesus is. She'd even brought her Bible with her. And her and Caden had this huge conversation. She has been searching. She was from a household where her parents were both atheists, very turned off that she was interested in spirituality, basically disowned her, specifically because of her interest in Christianity. So she was there, and as her and Caden were talking, it became very evident very quickly that they have two different Jesuses. Caden had one version of Jesus, the Jesus that comes out of Scripture. She had a different version of Jesus, the Jesus that came out of her understanding through psychedelics. And Caden basically said to her, "We have two different Jesuses. Your Jesus is an illusion, right. And the Jesus I serve is the one who will save you." And it was an amazing encounter. They had an amazing conversation. Lots of tears, lots of hugs, some pretty hard talks, but it was good. So, yeah, you can have encounters with all kinds of examples of Jesuses at Burning Man.
Yeah, and we have that at Paganicon. We have that at the Parliament of World Religions. Almost none of them would say, "No, there's no Jesus." I mean, some might, but most of them have a reimagined Jesus that kind of more fits what they want to believe.
Right.
And interacting with them is important.
Oh, absolutely.
Other things that go on, and it's been fascinating to me, is you're pointing out in discussions we've had that at Burning Man, some of the big names in culture attend because they're experimenting with things that they want to see move out into culture, and they want to see how it kind of operates in this community atmosphere of 70, 80,000 people. Who are they and what are they doing?
Yeah, a good question. So they're holding workshops, they're holding conversations, networking events. I will specifically go to places like Camp Mystic, which has ongoing conversations all week long. We had one of the I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he's well known in the Gaia network. talking about the mathematics of God, proving that we are all God mathematically. Some really interesting conversations around that. There's conversations around artificial intelligence, cryptocurrencies, the development of new legal norms. We are at a workshop at the Earth Guardians camp, which is kind of the epicenter of Burning Man's fight on climate change, promoting sustainable development, the Green New Deal, all of it. And we had a well-known activist in the field of promoting rights, global rights for animals and the natural world at the same level, at that same value system as human rights. And he was very clear that there is fundamentally no difference between us and the dust, us and birds, us and whatever animal life we have. In fact, we are all essentially the same. And so the discussion was how those values were being imputed within already I believe the Constitution or within the governmental structure of Ecuador and Peru, giving nature legal rights, giving rivers legal rights, giving birds legal rights, and having them on the same level as our human rights. And so that's a huge conversation. That has incredible and dangerous implications across the board, like absolutely significant.
As a side note question.
Yeah.
Do they do that for the unborn? No right for the unborn.
No, okay. Of course not. Of course not. Right. I mean, but it's a dangerous road, like absolutely dangerous, because now the narrative, that narrative would enable, let's say, you don't agree with this position? Well, we have a whole bank of lawyers who's going to come and represent nature and take you to court for, I don't know, some type of hate crime, or who knows how this could all get played out. But I had to raise my hand because I was like, all right, this is bogus. This is ridiculous already. And I'm always wrestling with, where do I ask the question? Where do I interject? Versus from that researcher's side, just allowing the conversation to continue. And so there's always a little bit of that tension. Yeah. Because you don't want to necessarily derail, because you want to have a solid grasp of where they're coming from. But I couldn't take it. Don, I just couldn't take it. My hand went up, and I asked the question to the effect of, beavers aren't having these conversations, geese aren't having these conversations, deer aren't having these conversations. In other words, by the fact that we're having these conversations, pro or con, whichever side of the argument you're going to be on, demonstrates that we have a value higher than nature. Period. Full stop. And I had this lady sitting beside me, and she looks at me and she's going, "You're right." I know. And I had to raise my hand a few more times and challenge some of the assumptions that the speaker was using as the anchor to make the argument that we should have a global legal system for nature that is on the same level, par, with human rights. Right. And after I had made my first challenge, this lady leans over and says, "Can we talk after the workshop?" Yes. And she had a friend, his name was Ryan. Most of our team for our camp was at this event. And then we ended up afterwards having like a whole afternoon conversation with, her name was Rosie, with Rosie and Ryan. It was awesome. I mean, I give the people at the Earth Guardian camp credit. They didn't interfere with our conversation. They allowed it to play out for the rest of the afternoon. No other events were taking place. So they're watching all of this from the sidelines as our little group with these two individuals. We're diving deep into theology, into what is biblical truth. Where does value come from? Right. Who determines value? Right. By the time it was said and done, there's tears flowing. Our team has prayed for Ryan now a couple of times. The next day, I go to Ryan and Rosie's camp. I find out where they're set up. I give them copies of my book. We invite them to our morning Bible study, because every morning we open up with our own little camp's Bible study. And they showed up, and they came literally for every Bible study afterwards. and then still had those conversations that would roll all morning long after our Bible study was done, to the point where by Sunday morning they had dragged some stranger off the street, somebody they didn't know, but they just ended up having a little encounter with this person, said, hey, come to church with us. We weren't even calling it church. It was just, our morning devotions. And Ryan comes from a hermetic, magical background. This is an occultist, you could call him that. And Rosie was ex-Catholic, playing with Wiccan ideas. And we had this multi-day conversation that is still taking shape now. It's still happening. So that's pretty cool. So people are searching. There's a sense of openness at events like this, because they're going with the anticipation that they're going to have some kind of transformative encounter. That something's going to shake them, because it's outside of the norm, and it is so outside of the norm. There's an openness there.
Right. You raise a really, really, really important point. And as it happens, my church loves that we do this, but it took them a while to kind of figure out what it is that we do. And they really want to reach people with the gospel, but they find it kind of a uphill battle often, because you're having to start a conversation with someone that may not even be interested. Whereas at these events, Burning Man, Parliament of World Religions, Paganicon, they are there talking about spiritual things. So the door is already open. We just have to figure out which shelf of the discussion we can enter into with them.
Exactly, Don. That's exactly right. And sometimes it happens in the most remarkable ways. I could give you oodles and oodles of examples. For whatever reason, this last burn, we had, daily, multiple encounters. So many encounters. I was hoping that we could get like 500 surveys done, because I'm there doing research as well. I'm doing worldview surveys. We got maybe 25 or 30 done. I haven't even counted them yet, but it was nothing. With a team of eight people, we should have had, the 500 surveys banged off in a couple of days. We couldn't. There was just, all we had was conversations and more encounters. But sometimes it happened in the most remarkable ways. One example is this. My daughter is sitting, we're at Camp Mystic waiting for the next workshop to start. She's sitting on the dusty floor. And Camp Mystic is a place of beautiful people, rich, influential people, the CEOs of big companies, people from the World Economic Forum are part of the organization of it. We've been there talking on or hearing workshops on sustainable development goals, global governance, psychedelics, artificial intelligence, climate change. Is all being wrestled with. It's basically the World Economic Forum in a little bit of a nutshell right there.
Yeah.
And so my daughter is sitting. She's sitting in the dust. We're waiting for the next workshop, and this beautiful Colombian lady, maybe 25 feet away from her, just kind of saunters by, and Austin, my daughter, they contact eyes. She just gives her a little smile, nothing much, little smile. This lady stops, and she makes a beeline for my daughter, and she gets on her knees, and she wraps herself around my daughter and cries all afternoon, like 2 hours of sobbing. And it was to a point where there's sometimes I would look back to see, okay, Austin, are you okay? And Austin's looking at me going, because it's still happening. And one of the other people from our group, Ginny, wonderful lady, absolutely love George and Ginny. Ginny comes alongside Austin, and then the two of them end up ministering to this woman for the afternoon. And it turns out that here in this space of incredible perfection, and everybody is put together, and everybody's beautiful, and everybody's connected, and everybody's an influencer, this lady had never felt more alone. And it was a smile and eye contact.
Right.
That broke her spirit.
Right.
And now, from what I understand, Ginny and Austin are both in contact with her. And I believe that Ginny kind of led her to the Lord and is now in the process of discipling her, all long distance, but yeah. So cool stuff.
That is very cool stuff. Watermelon Beast, that's interesting moniker. Wants to know, are there many big money promoters from psychedelic industry in attendance?
Oh, the biggest, the most important promoter of the psychedelic renaissance is Rick Doblin and MAPS. And Rick is an absolute rock star at Burning Man. So I went to a number of his workshops. He gave workshops at a couple of different camps, and he's always there. Alex Gray and his wife Allison, the world's most important visionary artist, were there as well, talking about how psychedelics and visionary art, in many respects, are kind of enabling a new global religion built around the experience of art, because art now is projecting outwardly what is happening inwardly through the psychedelic spiritual experience that we're all having, regardless of what your dogma is. Blah, blah, blah. And I mean, honestly, Rick Doblin is you could call him the Secretary General of the global psychedelic movement. There's no question. And he wasn't the only one. There's others, but yeah, those are the kind of conversations, the kind of people who are in attendance.
Right. So you're seeing that happening out there, and what is happening out there, as we talked about, is moving into culture and into the church.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So now we have, and I don't know how many watching this are aware of this. We have a psychedelic movement already moving into the church through Richard Rohr and his people, who basically hold the same worldview that you're finding there. They are panentheist.
Right.
And so at the last Parliament of World's Religions, Richard Rohr, in a workshop he was involved with, the workshop was spending time and talking about the importance of better spirituality through better drugs.
Right. And so we have this coming into the church. The Wild Goose Festival, which is a progressive church's version of Burning Man, it's their transformational festival, and there's actually a legacy connection to the Burn. The Burn was influential in the development of the Wild Goose Festival. This year, they had, I understand, at least a couple of workshops on the role of psychedelics in progressive Christianity and helping to shape a new Christian version of how to encounter Jesus.
Right. So one of the things that we often have to tell people is, if you want to know what is coming down the road toward a church near you, you're going to find it at Burning Man.
Right.
This is where they're experimenting with these things, and there are, I think you mentioned that someone had told you there's, like, I don't know, 800 transformational festivals in the U.S. annually.
Yep, something to that effect. And I think that would be a very broad categorization of what transformational festivals now would entail. But yes, and roughly 30, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers again, roughly 32 million Americans participate annually in some way, shape, and form. Many of those, I think, would probably be categorized more along the lines of a large concert venue or a concert experience that also now incorporates some of these other elements like workshops or a sacred space. They may not be full-on transformational events the way Burning Man is, or other events like Lightning in the Bottle or Evolve Fest, but nevertheless, they have some of these similar components that have that same effect. And it doesn't, it's amazing where some of this stuff pops up. I think Eau Claire, Wisconsin has a bluegrass festival where they now incorporate yoga and workshops. And I mean, it was always just been a bluegrass festival,
right,
and that now it's all of a sudden there's spirituality, kind of dovetailing into it, and it's no longer just simply
music.
Music. No, there's more elements added because people are hungry for a full orb experience.
Right. So they're bringing the spirituality into it. In part, it's because of the success of others, and so they are kind of doing seeker sensitive, if you will.
But it's more than that, I think, Don. I think the real thing is this is what people already are hungry for.
Yes.
So the seeing that this is already, it's working in other venues, but more than that, this is where the culture's at. And this is where re-enchantment comes in, because now that we've been through modernity, we've been through the atheism, the secularism, we've been through materialism. And we realize that has hollowed out the human experience, that has stripped the soul of its meaning,
Right.
There is this underlying hunger, this underlying tension of, well, I'm more than just atoms. There's
Right.
something else going on. And so that's why things like Burning Man become really interesting, because it's where materialism and spirituality converge, where mysticism and secularism all kind of coalesce. Golly, this spring I was at the Eclipse Festival in Texas, 35 to 40,000 people in this container, this festival container, to watch the alignment between the sun, the moon, you as the participant, and the earth underneath your feet. And you're supposed to now have this cosmic connection and have this spiritual flow, blah, blah, blah. But what's taking place is, on one corner of the grounds, you've got shamans, and they are drumming, and they've got their sacred fire, and there's psychedelics, and it's raising the consciousness, and it's all spiritual. Mm. And if I would have had a good arm, I could have pick up a stone, and I could have thrown a stone, and I could have hit the space stage where Elon Musk and SpaceX and NASA, and they're all there talking about technical, scientific processes.
Right.
But even there, they're recognizing that what we're really doing is engaging in cosmic futurism.
Spiritual, right.
Right, that we are now seeing the world as one and the cosmos as one. And we're now interacting with it technically.
So what you have is, you use the word materialism. I tend to use that less these days because we think of, money, whatever. I tend to think of it as physicalism versus spiritual.
Yep.
Are we simply physical beings that will cease to exist?
Right, the naturalistic worldview.
Naturalistic worldview, and people are going, no, I'm more than that. I'm a spiritual being, but what does that look like?
Right. Well, interesting to your point. Last year when we were doing surveys at Burning Man, because we have on the survey sheet, you can put down your religious indicators, your past and your present religion. Those who said they were atheist would also check off that they agreed, because I have another section to the survey, that they agree that the earth is fundamentally alive. So I'm like, hold on. I thought you're an atheist. Now you're saying you're an atheist, no doubt thinking about the Christian God. But then as you go into this other section of the survey, you're saying that the earth is fundamentally alive, which is a mythological position. So like, you're an atheist / mythologist? I'm not sure what you are. Yeah. I don't even know if you know what you are.
Exactly. They're confused. Watermelon Beast wants to know where he can send you a supply of Sentan lotion.
I love it.
And they also pointed out that Johns Hopkins, who's been very big in the psychedelics area, is starting to back away since Dr. Roland Griffiths passed away. So,
yep. In fact, John Hopkins was, they were leading the workshop, Don, that you and I attended at the Parliament in 2023 on psychedelics and spirituality. Yep.
All right. So that's interesting. So the psychedelics is all incorporated in their psychedelic movement as an official organizations that are promoting psychedelics. What about transhumanism that you mentioned that?
Yeah.
Does that show up there?
It absolutely does, especially along the lines of artificial intelligence and what that may mean for the future human evolution. Sometimes we've had other years. So here's an example. I have the Where, What, When guide from the 2018. And by the way, the Where, What, When guide is a booklet of all the different events you can go to when you're at Burning Man. And there's a lots that aren't in the guide. You have to go search them out. But 2018, the theme was I, Robot, asking the question, can man and machine merge, based off of course, Isaac Asimov's ideas. But the workshops, so many of them that year, were built around, how does artificial intelligence, robotics, how does even cryptocurrency, how does this fit into changing not just culture, but even humanity itself, the underlying human condition? So this year, my work, all my notes from my workshops. The first one I went to, my first workshop was on Tuesday on neuroscience, psychedelics, and virtual reality, built around the idea of humanity 2.0 to help ourselves become and the words I have here in quotation, a new humanity. We need to shift our thinking about artificial intelligence from a servant to being our artificial children.
And so, what are some of the big names that are involved in the transhumanism movement?
Well, that's a good question because it's more of a general conversation than it is, let's say, somebody from Ray. I've never seen Ray Kurzweil out there or Martin Rothblatt, though they may go, and they're probably like the two of the biggest names besides Max Moore, and I've never seen him or his wife Natasha there. Nevertheless, this is Silicon Valley's event, so Google is there.
Right.
In fact, if you use Google Maps, I use it. It was beta tested at Burning Man. The very first Google Doodle in 1998, the fall of 1998, August of 98, was the Burning Man symbol, and that was Google's way of saying we're burners first. And
okay, we have a little bit of a freeze there. So we're going to see if Carl recovers. Oh, there he is.
Oh, I didn't become transhuman. Look at that.
You did not. I was waiting for it to happen. And I just wanted to mention it again. You and I are aware of this. Others may not. But there is a belief amongst Rothblatt and the others that they should be able to download themselves into a computer like around 2035 or 40.
That was the idea. 2045 was kind of the benchmark.
2045. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good luck.
So, good luck. Well, it is kind of interesting because I love sci-fi books. I really like sci-fi books because many of the good sci-fi writers are dealing with where science is trying to go right now, and then playing with it to say, okay, what does this look like in the future? And
right.
One of the questions that I can't remember it's a trilogy, 3 books. I forget the title of it, but the question that they're trying to answer is, does the soul transfer into the computer when I download myself? That's the question they're trying to answer. And they have 3 books, and at the end of the 3 books, they can't really tell you if it does or not. So is it just your information that downloads, or is it the you that downloads? That's a big question.
It is a huge question. So this year, two of our teammates went to a workshop on asking the question about what is human, what makes us human, which fits into that transhumanist discussion. What is humanity? How are we valued? What makes us human? Are we just meat? Are we just atoms? What is it that sets us apart? Or more to the point, are we set apart? Are we somehow different? And the workshop kind of got derailed by my team right off the bat as they went around the circle, having to describe what makes them human or what they believe makes you human. And they were using, of course, the Genesis account saying that we were created in God's image. Therefore, we have a value that is intrinsically different than the natural world. Doesn't mean that we're the same as God, not at all. That's not what it's saying.
Right.
But that we are his imagers, that we are to reflect his character, that we are to reflect him as ambassadors here where we have been set, where we have been positioned.
So I want to say a couple of things for those who are going to see, not only here live, but are going to view this later. You are not opposed to having people to help to fund some of these adventures that you go on for research and evangelism.
Yeah.
Where would they perhaps contribute finances toward that end?
Well, we've just closed our Go Send Me account, not account, but we had a Give Send Go account to help offset some of the costs of Burning Man because it is expensive. Okay, it's not
very
cheap.
Expensive.
Yeah, very, especially when you're traveling 30 hours one way just to get to it. Because you have to bring everything. You have to bring all your own camping gear, everything that you need for the course of the week. And of course, entrance in isn't cheap either. There's a fee. So, you can reach out. We do take donations by PayPal, and that's really appreciated, because this is a gift of
Okay.
love, and a gift to the community as well.
So they can contact you through your website, Forcing Change.
That's correct. Yep,
So
forcingchange.org.
forcingchange.org, and that's a
Yep.
good website. You want to go and see what he's up to there. Now, I'm going to ask you one other thing before we close out for the day, and that is, I'll make an announcement now on November 5. Is that right? November 5?
I thought it was 15, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I believe it's November 5. It was.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We're going to be starting a 18 or 20 week series with you at 8:00 at night on Tuesday nights.
Yep.
What kind of things are you going to cover in that for those who think they might want to join us live?
But deeper.
Game of Gods. There you go. Another promotion. Game of Gods.
So I teach a course on secular trends, which the trend of secularism is really spirituality. I teach a course at a small Bible college. I'll be using that material as we go through those weeks.
Right. So it will be live. You can watch it after we're done. We're just going to call it Game of Gods, and Carl will be leading it. I'll be pushing buttons and interrupting occasionally. We have about 6 or 7 who will be in the virtual studio with us, who may interrupt as Carl gives them leave to do so. But we do have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. 18 weeks, maybe 20 weeks. We're going to be a little flexible with that. It's important stuff. If you want to make an impact in the culture, you need to understand what the culture is doing.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, many churches, well-meaning, are disconnected from what's going on around them until it creeps in, and then they don't know what to do.
Yep.
So Krista Matthias, who's one of our regulars, her and her family, the caffeinated Colorado crew, will be present and accounted for, and full of questions, I have no doubt. Carl, I thank you for joining us. I don't have the walkout music, unfortunately. And so with that, we're just going to say adios.
All right. Thank you so much, Don, and looking forward to our conversation.